All right. Hi, how's it going? Welcome to the listeners that are listening. This is the first episode of Resilient Voices and Beyond. I have with me Rebecca, the Executive Director of NFYI, and I'm so excited for her to be my first guest. I've known her for some years. I've had the awesome experience of doing Shadow Day, and she just gave me a warm welcome. And also did have been in a chapter too. So without further ado, I would love for her to kind of give us an introduction of herself and who she is.
Great. Thank you, Michael. My name is Rebecca Louvial, and I am the Executive Director of the National Foster Youth Institute, also known as NFYI. I've been with the organization since 2018. I currently live in the Washington, DC area, but I'm originally from California, San Diego, actually to be exact, but I've lived all over California. So I claim the whole state because I feel like I've moved around enough in California to just call California my home. I'm also a former foster youth. I aged out of foster care a really long time ago. We won't talk about the year. Um, but I think one of the things that stood out for me when I aged out is way back when there wasn't even transitional housing. There was not any support services at all for college students. And I had gone away to college and really struggled with having to be homeless during breaks, right? And having limited support systems. So I really got passionate and involved in wanting to change systems so that my foster care brothers and sisters that are coming up across the nation after me have better opportunities and more support than I did in foster care. And I've been doing that work since 2002. I started in college working as a youth advocate in a group home. I then later went on to manage a youth board with the Jim Case Youth Opportunities Initiative. I worked with California Youth Connection for many years, mobilizing youth across the state of California to transform their system. And then I got my master's in social work. I just actually this week passed my clinical LCSW exam. So I'm officially a therapist. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think that, I was a case carrying social worker for I say 3 years because I had a year of internship, which was really just being a case carrying social worker for a year. Um, and I'm an adoptive mom. So I adopted my daughter, who I started out as her mentor, and is now my daughter from foster care. And I bring that up to say that I think that one of the benefits that I bring to my position at NFYI is that I have been able to view the child welfare system from multiple vantage points, right? I'm a former foster youth. I was a youth advocate. I'm a social worker. I've had the unfortunate challenge of having to remove children from homes and have to support children in foster care with limited resources of support from counties and the government, going through an adoption process. And so I think it has really allowed me to view a system from multiple vantage points, which only helps with the work and position that I'm currently in.
That is amazing. I just want to just say that you are a champion. Like you've done so much and you've given a lot of yourself and your life, and that's more than I can say for a lot. But that is just amazing, and I just want to commend you and say I appreciate you as a fellow Foster alumni, but also as a social worker who that is in this field and just taking on the great fight. Um, you kind of answered my next question, which is why this field. But I think you kind of answered that by talking about your experience and also with your family, your daughter, and so forth. So I want to get into a little bit more of what navigated you to NFYI and to the executive director position.
That's such a great question, Michael. I never, ever, ever envisioned myself as a social worker or an executive director. I think, like most foster youth, I emancipated and was like, all right, I want nothing to do with child welfare. But I found myself being pulled back. I think the thing that I love about an FYI is that not only is our mission to transform systems, but we do that by trying to transform individual lives, right? And we have conversations around authentic alumni or people with experience of care engagement and involvement in that. And I think for me, my life was transformed when I started to be able to be an advocate. I was able to use my voice differently in my own personal life. And I was able to get access and opportunities to mentors who gave me advice and supported me along the way. And really experience things I never would have been able to experience, coming from my background. And so I feel like NFYI, when I saw the job opening in 2018, it was not for the executive director position. I started out as a national director. It really was my dream job. And I was like, I love mobilizing people. I love seeing individuals being so empowered that they change and transform their lives. And I love to see that the systems are changing to create a system that is really truly supportive, and that children who are not that don't need to be in foster care are not, and the small percentage of children that should be in foster care are there and in loving supportive homes. And so NFYI really was the catalyst that allowed me to do that. I moved on a whim. I applied for a position in LA actually, and our founder, Congresswoman Karen Bass, had said, would you be willing to relocate to DC? And I said, sure, I'm like, wherever you need me, like, this is my dream job. And I think through the organization has, the last few years, we're a young organization. We're coming up on, this is our 10th year. And it seems like a long time, right? But for organizations, it's not. Like for nonprofits, we're small and mighty. And I think that as we've seen our needs change internally, we've been able to really restructure. And I moved from the national director into the development director, which is a whole different world and a different language to learn how to talk about the work that you're doing with individuals and foundations that want to invest in the work that you're doing. And then there was an opportunity to apply to be an executive director. And I have to be honest, I was like, nah, that's not for me, right? I like programs, but everybody in my life was like, you need to lean into this. And this is a challenge that you should try on, and that they really had faith in me. And I thought, why not? What am I doing? Right. So I decided to take the challenge, and it's been challenging and fun. And I'm learning a lot along the way, making a lot of mistakes, which I believe in, failure till you succeed. But I think there's a lot of successes. And I think in the last year that I've been the executive director, NFYI has doubled our staff size. We've really developed clear goals and objectives, and really have a much better understanding of where we want to go as a team and an organization. And I think we're building a culture that is supportive of alumni. And one of the things I'm also passionate about is how do we hire and support foster youth within the organization, right? Because that looks different than just like working at a corporation, right? Somewhere that has very strategic, like, how do you create an environment where young people with lived experience can come in, and be supportive, and not just saying, I've been that alumni of care who was thrown in, and then the expectations to be this professional staff member, right? And whatever that looked like was thrown at me, and I was like, what? And so I think we're really having internal conversations on how do we become more supportive internally and continue to build opportunities for professional development.
That's great. If you don't mind, I want to go back to that last point. How do organizations develop spaces for foster alumni to be able to be represented as professionals, but also as assets and stuff like that? Because as you know, and as I know, when you're working in the child welfare arena in any facet, um, it's helpful to have someone with lived experience, whether they're there as an advisor, peer support, or whatever, aspect, or even as a social worker. It's helpful to have them, but sometimes, you know, um, having that lived experience, um, some people haven't dealt with that lived experience. So being put in that arena to work with other alumni can be triggering, could bring up a lot of different things. So how do you create an environment that's friendly, safe, but also what's the word I'm looking for? Um, is it cohesive, for them to get support when they are triggered, because it's inevitable for them to be triggered in that kind of workspace. It's just as, if I may ask, like, even as a social worker, was there times where, you were triggered from being an alumni?
Oh, I'm triggered now, right? Like our triggers don't go away. We just get better at managing and becoming aware of them and handling, what it is. And I think that's a really great question, Michael. And I want to start by saying that NFYI is creating that environment. And so I don't know that we have like the secret recipe yet. It's something that we talk about internally and that we really look forward to. I think a couple things that I do that's different is, I think one of the things that has happened to me is that I was hired in positions because I had the drive, the passion, the lived experience, but I didn't actually have the skill set. And then what happened is I got into that position and I was expected to have the skill set, right? And then the organization didn't train me or support me or mentor me to develop the skills. And there was this tension. And I always felt like I was failing, right? And I was never doing the right thing, because the truth is I probably should have never been hired in that position, right? I wasn't qualified. So what we are really trying to do at NFYI is building different entry points, right? So we have one staff member that started out, for example, as a shadow day participant and doing some local advocacy work. And then that person transitioned into being an intern and developed skills there. And now that person is a coordinator, right? And we are really intentional about providing, as much as we have resources to provide, professional development opportunities to learn supervisor and management skills, right? Or like, right. And part of it is like also seeing you authentically of what are you bringing to the table and what are the areas of growth, but also not hiring people into positions that you might need someone with extensive experience, right?
Mhm.
So I think the first thing is really, how do we get our foundational staff of folks like community organizers who've been community organizers, who know how to strategically plan and mobilize young people? And then how do we find the resources to bring other people along the line so that they can develop those skills and they can either hopefully get a job with us, but also move on so that they're more successful. I also think it's about transparency, right? And so we do a lot of internal trainings around implicit bias, cultural humility, right? I have an open door policy. I expect my staff to push back on me and to disagree with me in respectful ways, right? But for them to say, hey, Rebecca, we think you got it wrong, or hey, here's our ideas, is really super important. And I think having expectations that people are walking in a place where you can be self-reflective. We're all going to get triggered, but can I recognize that I'm being triggered in this moment and take some self-care time and communicate that to say, you know what, I need a minute, and let me check in with whether it's your therapist or your support group or your pastor or whoever it is for you that you need to check in and work through that, so that your experiences are not being brought in and impacting other people, right? I also think that like all of our staff recognize that once you become NFYI staff members, it's not about our journey or our story, right? The child welfare system looks totally different and across the nation from when I emancipated. That doesn't mean that my story isn't important and that it isn't something to be shared or talked about, but it isn't the spotlight, right? like our members and our participants are the spotlight, and because you guys are the ones that are living in and going through it. And I think that that has really helped staff to be able to get some space between their experience and transforming others, right? And I think that we have a great team where we can really, and even our staff that are not foster youth, to be like, look, this is my stuff, right? Like I lived with my grandmother or whatever, and like being able to really be self-reflective and being in an environment where that's okay. I mean, I remember in grad school, a professor told me that they didn't think I should be that I wasn't ready to be a social worker. I wouldn't be a good social worker, because we were having a conversation and I said, you know what, working with this particular population right now is not something I feel like I am going to be beneficial to the population, because I haven't worked through some stuff, right? And they were like, well, then maybe you shouldn't be a social worker. And that is like, what kind of answer is that, right? What, like everybody has stuff. I mean, I've known people that are not foster youth who have more, trauma, right, than most of the foster youth. So part of it is recognizing what is your stuff and are you in a place to step into it? And if you're not, tag a team member in, right? And how do we support our team to be able to do that while we're also, getting the work done? But I wouldn't say that it's easy. It's not something that you write a policy about. It's something that is a continuing, evolving conversation that happens at multiple levels, right? And is really individualized. What does Michael need to be successful in this position is a lot different than what Rebecca needs to be successful. And I think the other thing is I think our team trusts me and the leadership team to be equitable. So if I say, Michael needs this thing that you don't get, you trust that that's not because I'm playing favorites. It's because you need something, and that when they have a need, that need, the organization will try to meet that need in a professional way, right? We also are not service providers. I'm not your therapist. So there are boundaries, but I think the key is being transparent and having conversations about what is it that the organization can do to support you and what is it that the organization just can't do, right?
Right.
And how can I maybe connect you in your community to get the support that you do need to be successful, and not take it personal if NFYI is not the space for you right now.
Definitely. I agree with that 100%. I appreciate that. And I think, as you see um, the alumni population growing and getting older, you see a lot of leaders that are going into the professional realm, starting their own foundations, or writing books, and doing all these things, and they're wanting to bring in other alumni. So I think from your experience and your time in this, it's helpful. It will be helpful for them to hear that, to get that tidbit. Couple other things I wanted to touch base on. 2021. It was a year. It was a year, to say the least. A lot of things happened. I got to see it from a different lens, being a part of the chapter and doing some things with you guys. But just gonna go down a list of things. COVID happened. Students that did things with you guys lost housing. For some of our Black and Brown community, witness, George Floyd. COVID took another uprise. People were losing housing due to evictions and different things like that. So it's just a list of different things. Can you walk me through NFYI, experience with this and support, to the alumni and so forth?
That's a great question. 2020 and 2021, right? Like, they have been a really challenging 2 years for the world, right?
Yes.
But even more, I think, for our population and our community in particular. I think one of the things that I have been trying to do personally is learn to let go. right? Because I think we, particularly as a former foster youth, like I really like predictability. I got like plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Like some stuff's going to go down and I'm ready and prepared for it. And the thing that the last years have showed me is like, you can't have a plan because you don't even know like who would have like now we have a new variant, like what, right? So I think I've learned to become more flexible. Our staff have like, I feel like in our meetings, we're like, so we're going to plan to do this, but we might not do that. So, right. And I think our membership is rightly frustrated. We've had to cancel Saturday 2 years in a row. I'm frustrated. I'm angry about that. Right. There was part of it was Saturday and part of it was the insurrection on the Hill and their, and Congress saying we don't want large numbers of people to come, which I get that as well after, the insurrection happened. So, so much I think has been out of our control. And I think for a lot of our community, it can be very triggering because so much of our childhoods are out of our control, right? And so I think what we've tried to do is think about and double plan, right? Like we're going to plan for a Saturday or a virtual convening, right? So, and so how do you plan for both of those at the same time? Because you might need to not have in-person events, right? I think some of the areas we've been trying to do mental health Mondays because we recognize community is important. These are not therapy groups, but it's an opportunity for alumni of care to get together in community and share space, right? And whatever that looks like and the different Monday events. I think the only benefit that I can really think about the last 2 years is that the first time in my knowledge that decision makers are willing to meet virtually. And I think in some ways that has really benefited our work because we've been able to elevate experiences and stories and young people that we just never had the resources to fly to DC. Before you'd have to fly people to DC, find the funding to feed and lodge that person, right? And so you might be able to fund 2 people, right? Every 3 months. Now I can do a town hall twice a week if I wanted to and have different voices that are represented from people from Hawaii to Alaska, right, to Michigan, to wherever. And decision makers are authentically like listening and engaging and paying attention more than they've ever done in the past. So I think that has been the real benefit. And we've seen a lot of impact both legislatively, right, with the passing of the Chafee funding, but also we've seen impact on decision makers who've said, wow, I have never been impacted by foster youth in the way that I have been in the last 2 years. And so really being able to get our story out. I say all the time that every issue is a child welfare issue. You can't throw any topic at me that does not relate to foster kids, immigration, right? Veteran affairs, right? Like we saw Texas froze over. What? Like that's impacting foster youth, right? So I want to, part of our goal at NFYI is to not only elevate the priorities of our membership base, but also ensure that when we're having national conversations around police brutality, right? The justice system and the injustice system is what it is, right? It's an injustice system that we have. How are we making sure that current and former foster youth are not being left out of those conversations? And that those experiences are making sure that they're being highlighted. And when we're having conversations about resources or legislative and policy, that our young people are a part of those conversations, no matter the topic. And I think we've done a really great job at responding to all of that. And I think where we're going is really trying to reach more voices, right? And continue to mobilize and get people involved and engaged in those conversations, because the foster care population is the most diverse population I think you're ever going to meet, right? You've got people with PhDs, lawyers, doctors, and you've got young people that are struggling with severe mental health, right? You've got people that were adopted to very affluent families and people who grew up in very abusive foster homes. So we want to make sure that we're highlighting all of those experiences so that legislators and decision makers really understand the complexity of our community.
Thank you. That was a boatload of information. I'm just gonna say that, and it, to say the least, that complexity speaks volumes, and to say like the complexity nationally, of the demographic of foster youth, but even to take that, break it down into states, and I think about the state of Michigan. Foster care in the UP is totally different from foster care in the southern part of Michigan, so like it's a lot that goes into it. And I'm glad that you guys are doing the work to kind of highlight that for our legislators. Just a couple more questions for you. I appreciate you being able to answer these questions. My last couple questions are with NFYI, is there any, well, let me rephrase that. Where do you guys see yourself going this year? What things are you guys working on this year or looking to address?
Yeah, that is a great question. So we are really hoping, fingers and toes and everything crossed that you can think of, that we can have an in-person Saturday event in June. Hopefully, knock on wood. Again, the world is unpredictable, but so that's a big thing on our plate. We really want to be able to come out and do that. Members of Congress want us to do that. I think we're also really looking at how do we create programs that are maybe continue to be a hybrid. And as we move to having more safe in-person events, also continuing the virtual events. Because like I said before, I think it's been beautiful that we've been able to pull youth from Michigan and California and New York and New Jersey and Florida all together on a Zoom call and have amazing conversations and dialogue and learning from each other. We don't want to stop that work. But we also recognize a need for physical presence of folks. So I think we're going to continue to do that. Some of our goals include expansion of our membership base and expansion of our decision maker reach. How do we reach more local and state decision makers, right? How do they know about, how do we ensure that they're knowing more about child welfare and our priorities? And then of course we do have our priority if you go to our website, this is the 9-month pregnancy brain talking, where I'm like, what are our priorities this year, Michael? I know we have juvenile justice. COVID obviously is a big one. And let's see, we have homelessness is always an issue that we address, and it's getting worse and worse. We have health and wellness. We always want to encourage voter registration, right? Get out and vote and get civically involved. Higher education. How do we ensure that more foster youth are graduating from college or trade school or whatever higher education that you need? And I think that our membership base has been talking a lot about this idea of a national standard of care. So how do we ensure more equitable services across states? How do we make sure that young people living in Michigan are, like you said, like even within the state of Michigan, right? Like, how is it that young people, that there's such a disproportionate level of resources being allocated to young people in different parts of the place, that it's really unfair, right? And their outcomes are substantially different, all because their county or their state didn't allocate that kind of support program. So those are some of the topics that we're reaching on. And of course, always, being responsive to what's going on around the country with everything. I mean, I think race and equity fills all of those topics, right? There's a disproportionate number of children of color that are impacted by the child welfare system. Then, and so that is something that is always addressed in all of our campaign topics, right? It's not a standalone topic because it's an issue that we face as a country, right? And so dismantling racist systems is super important. And we know that child welfare is one of those systems that needs a hard look at itself, to be able to stop putting poor people and people of color in foster care, right? Because of poverty or because of race.
Thank you. Thank you. I only have one more thing to ask of you. And I'm going to break it down this way because I think it's important for those individual listeners and different pieces of yourself. So any advice and tidbits that you may have as an alumni, and then any advice and tidbits that you may have as a social worker. Um, if you could share that, and then we gotta close us out.
That's so hard. I think that my advice as an alumni really is to surround yourself and build your chosen family. I have a very strong chosen family. There's not a lot of people in it, but the ones that I have chosen to be a part of my community are people that share my values and that are going places that I want to go, right? So latch yourself on to individuals, because I never believed, I didn't think I would live past 20, to be honest with you, until I made it to 20. Then I was like, wow, all right, I won't live another year. And for many years, right? Until I really started to surround myself with people who believed in me more than I could believe in myself at the time, until I started to be able to believe in myself. And so I call them my rocket friends, right? And they're the ones that were like, apply to be an executive director. You can do that. And I was like, that seems like a big title, right? There's an imposter syndrome. Like, a foster kid can't be an executive director. What? And they were like, sure you can, right? And so really, I think that has transformed my life of seeking out new opportunities and new people and being open-minded and asking questions, and mainly asking for help, because people want to give you help, right? You got to ask the right people. And I think also identifying the other piece is identifying the takers, right? And I think as foster youth, we get this loyalty complex sometimes, where we feel like we have to help individuals that may not be ready to help themselves, and then they're just keeping us down. And so I think the advice is set boundaries, right? Love people. There's no judgment in it. But I also don't need to have, 7 people living with me while I try to pay everybody's bills. You know what I'm saying? Because that's not helpful or healthy for me. And it's not helpful or healthy for them. So I would say surround yourself with your rocket friends, and surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and be open to learning and growth. And I think that's really, some of the things that have allowed me to get to where I'm at. As far as a social worker, I think, really forgiving yourself is super crucial. And I think self-care and healing through your trauma is a priority that everybody should take, and whatever that looks like for you. Like I said, if it's therapy, if it's a pastor, if it's sports, I don't care what it looks like, Buddhist, but the meditation, yoga, whatever. But I think when you can do the work, and it's hard work, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, is heal through my own trauma, but it's so liberating, right? And if you can stick through the hard part of it, you will come out feeling more in control of your life, and feeling happier all around, and be kind to social workers. I used to hate social workers until I became one. And so the thing I always tell people is social workers can only be as good as the systems allow them to be, right? Take that into perspective. Don't get me wrong, there's some terrible social workers out there, but I think most people go into social work because they genuinely want to be helpful, and we don't always know how to do that.
Right.
No.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope you guys listening, that advice was helpful for you guys. I just want to say I thank you so much for being my first guest. hopefully I can have you back when I do a live podcast at some point. Don't know yet, so don't quote me on that.
You will,
But
Michael. You're going to go big places. I feel it. I've been telling you that since I met you.
I hope so.
I'm so honored to be your first. Actually, a grad school friend found your, I have to tell you, my grad school friend found your flyer here with my face on it. And they were like, I can't believe you're going to be on a podcast. So you're like already famous. She's not even involved in child welfare stuff. So go, Michael.
See, look at that. But thank you. I appreciate you guys for listening to the first episode of Resilient Voices and Beyond. You guys have a great and blessed day, night, evening, whenever you're listening. Please stay safe and healthy out there.